Hey there, it's Miriam with Mobile Geeks, and this here is the LG G Flex 2. And you know, at first sight it just looks like any regular phone really, but this is where it gets really interesting. It is a curved phone, just like last year's G Flex, but it's higher end than last year's G Flex, and more importantly, has smaller display than last year's G Flex. So things have kind of changed in the other direction, I guess. It's no longer a mid-range device, the curved phone from LG this year. It's a kind of a high-end device. It actually slots itself potentially higher in terms of specs than the G3. So what's the deal? Well, Snapdragon 810, it's one of the few, probably the first at least that has crossed my desk. 3 gigs of RAM and 32 gigs of built-in storage on this particular model. And it has a 1080p display here. It's a 5.5-inch display. Last year was a 6-inch 720p curved AMOLED, plastic AMOLED. And this year is a 1080p 5.5-inch plastic AMOLED display. And it's much, much nicer. Last year's display looked really kind of faded. And if you look at it now, this is a much, much nicer screen, much better viewing angle, much better color rendition. It doesn't have that artificial pop that a lot of OLED display have. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell. In the back, as you can see again, the curviness of this all, you have the usual familiar layout for LG phones, which is the camera pod that's flanked below by the volume button and power key. But of course you can double tap on the screen to wake and put the phone to sleep. So you basically rarely end up using the power lock key at all. This is a Korean unit, so it's got LTE Advanced, and that doesn't really help us in the US, but this does work on AT&T. It's unlocked and it gets LTE on AT&T. With T-Mobile it doesn't have the LTE band, so you're kind of stuck on HSPA+, which is not really that bad, but anyway. That's it in a nutshell in terms of specs. The other thing to keep in mind about this phone is the battery is not removable. You can remove the back cover and access a micro SIM in here and a micro SD card slot. But the battery is fixed at 3,000 milliamp hour. It's a pretty large battery. So it's a pretty high-end phone from LG basically, and it's pretty cool looking. The curve is actually interesting because it's supposedly strengthens the entire structure of the phone. If it gets dropped on its face, the load's going to get spread between the two apexes, the two ends here, into the phone. At least that's what they claim, and I'm actually willing to believe that. They've also used a specially strengthened glass on this phone, which is really interesting. So pretty rugged. It still flexes a little bit if you try to bend it by hand, but not quite as much as the original G Flex, which you could easily bend with your hands. So I don't think that's the point of it, though. The point of it is to feel comfortable in your pocket, comfortable when you hold it to your face. And yeah. So anyway, this OLED display is a huge improvement, as I mentioned, over the old one. I don't have an old G Flex here to show you, but it's really night and day. This looks like a top-of-the-line modern 1080p OLED panel. And then in the back, there's also a great camera here. LG didn't skimp. We got their 13 megapixel autofocus camera. This is actually an improved optical image stabilization module, and it's got the laser autofocus from the G3 and the dual LED dual color flash. So, you know, pretty much state of the art. Basically, with a slightly better processor than the Snapdragon 810 and you know, and a slightly lesser display because it's not Quad HD like the G3, this is basically, you know, kind of skirts around the G3, and in that sense is kind of a flagship for LG in my opinion. You can see the speaker down here, LG logo, the LTE Advanced logo for this Korean device, the volume rocker and power lock key, the laser autofocus camera and flash, and that's basically it for the back. If I flip it over now, you can see there is a 2 megapixel front-facing camera here, the earpiece and a bunch of sensors. There's also a notification light, which is great, and then this beautiful display. The keys are all in software, and you see a little LG logo. I don't know if you can tell, but behind the glass is some kind of circular pattern that's kind of well done. So yeah, basically it's a beautiful design. There's no buttons on the edges. If I walk you through really quickly here, you'll see that there is an infrared port there for remote control to control a TV, secondary microphone, and then on the bottom here you have the micro USB charge and data port, as well as the 3.5mm headphone jack, and the primary mic. But that's basically it in terms of the tour of the device. The LG G Flex 2 is quite the powerhouse, and it's very beautiful in this shade of red. It has supposedly a scratch-resistant finish, but you know that's the LG has advertised this since back in the days of the G Flex, and yeah, somewhat for very fine scratches it self-heals, but I would be cautious that it's also a bit of a fingerprint magnet, so I'm not quite sure this is necessarily a selling point per se. So this is what LG's UI looks like in the general home screen. You've got this little Google Now-like notification area here, you know, and a bunch of screens you can configure with a bunch of widgets. And then they have this kind of little weird accordion thing at the kind of end of the screens, which shows you your health, LG Health stuff, and some tips here. Is configurable, but you know, it's not really that compelling experience. Here's what the tray looks like with the apps when you're running the default UI. And unfortunately, by the way, there's a McAfee security pre-installed that you can't remove on this particular unit. Here's the TV app. You can see which is a standard Korean thing. Most Korean phones have digital video broadcast support and can receive TV signals digitally, and it's pretty popular over there. So, you know, the multitasking still exists, and it's Lollipop, as you can see, on top of Skin by LG, and it's close to their UI with some new touches. The notifications in particular are very Lollipop-ish. Just in case you're wondering, I'm actually running the Android, the Google Now launcher here, so it's not quite the stock user experience. I can scroll over and get Google Now. I also have the Google keyboard installed because I like a more Nexus-like experience. But software-wise, this is a Lollipop but adapted to the standard UI that we've come and but adapted to the standard UI we've seen on the G3. So that's, you know, that's basically it. The camera app is very similar to the G3. It's unfortunately lacking a lot of manual controls, which I feel are a little you know, a little bit disappointing. But you know, here it is scrolling through. This is a really fast phone, by the way. That Snapdragon 810 really feels great. This is what the controls look like. You know, the usual menu layout. You have a choice, of course, to switch to a tab view. That's pretty standardized on some Korean phones like the Samsungs as well. I prefer the list view, so there we are. And then finally, I'm not quite sure why I have Bluetooth turned on actually, but anyway, you know, this is nice and fast. There's really nothing to complain about here. Nice and fast device. And so I'll show you the skin in a moment. In terms of opening apps, etc., you really don't feel any lag or anything like that. I haven't run any benchmarks specifically, but it feels fast and snappy to me at pretty much in all circumstances. So now let's do a comparison with the G3 so you can have a look at that and see how it feels. So here's a G Flex 2 versus a G3, and as you can see, the G3 is a little wider and bit shorter. Both of them have 5.5-inch screens, obviously, so just keep that in mind. One is Quad HD versus 1080p, and then IPS versus OLED, so there's a big difference there. You can see roughly the difference in color temperature here. The G Flex 2 is a bit lower in brightness right now, so I can crank it up a little more so you can see the difference. That's what it looks like when they're cranked up together. And so this is on 100 as well. They're both on 100 right now. And yeah, that's it in a nutshell. Of course, there's no curve on the G3, and if you flip them over, you can see how similar they look in terms of the overall industrial design. There is, both are Korean devices here, but there's the same layout with the volume buttons, the power key, the camera pod, and the autofocus, laser autofocus, and dual LED flash speaker. They're pretty much identical other than the curve So yeah, that's basically it compared to the G3. And so if I stack them on top of each other now, you can really see the curving here that's going on. It's pretty amazing how curved the G Flex 2 is compared to the G3. And if I stack them like this, I think you can really see the curving that's going on here. So yeah, that's basically it in a nutshell. The other thing to keep in mind about these two phones is now I've swapped them. You can see actually the auto brightness has changed things a little bit here. But the other thing to keep in mind, obviously, is the Snapdragon 810, but slightly lesser resolution. The other thing to keep in mind is Snapdragon 810 with slightly lesser. The other thing to keep in mind is that it's a Snapdragon 810, but you lose a little bit in terms of resolution since the G3 has a quad HD display. So yeah, but other than that, I think it's a delightful phone. I've really enjoyed using it. You know, I haven't really had that much time with it, unfortunately, but so far my experience has been really top-notch, and I would really recommend this phone to anyone. This is a gorgeous, gorgeous device, pretty much a flagship for LG, and feels great in hand, has fantastic specs, the camera is amazing, great sound quality. Yeah, the only thing that I would say is a matter of taste mostly at this point, whether you'd want this phone. And of course, it's not available in North America. It's really a Korean-only device at this point. So getting one that's got the right bands if you're in Europe or in the US or in Canada or, you know, in other parts of the world like Asia is going to be potentially challenging. Korea has some pretty specific requirements for its devices. So yeah, the LG G Flex 2 here on Mobile Geeks. This is Miriam. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter and on Facebook and everywhere else. I hope you enjoyed this review, and stay tuned for more here on Mobile Geeks. Cheers.